Good morning. In this session, I'm going to try and go over very, very briefly some of the elements of our current national security strategy, hopefully providing a little bit of historical context to what we have. As you look at it, I think the first thing to recognize is we need to understand what we mean by security, and that over the past several decades, I suppose, we've gone away from looking at only the traditional security challenges, that's sort of the national security, state-on-state types of behavior, to include ideas of human security, which is dealing with terrorist attacks, trafficking, and how people look at themselves as being secure, and to understand that international security really relies on both of these foundations. So I've listed in this table some ideas that show the distinction between national security and human security and who is at interest here. And it really is a matter of political philosophy and how you look at the world, which you think is more important. Again, I think it's the case in the world in which we live that both of these are required if we are to achieve some level of security for the world writ large. It's important to remember that for us, then, with this understanding of what security might be about, that the national security strategy is, in the grand scheme of things, a relatively recent document. It's mandated by the '86 Goldwater-Nichols Act, and the act spells out what it is that the national security strategy ought to include. I want you to look really at the national security strategy ideas down at the bottom, mostly not for the historical idea, but for the idea that only one of the presidents, since the act was passed and signed, has actually come close to carrying out the requirements of the act for an annual report. George Herbert Walker Bush published 3 national security strategies in the 4 years that he was in office. No other president has done more than 1 per administration. And I think you can see that's true regardless of political party or political leaning or anything else. And the current administration appears to be headed pretty much on the same tack. When we look at the national security strategy, we really need to understand the differences between different levels of strategy. The national security strategy operates at a grand strategy level, and it intends to be aware of and to refer to all types of national power. When we look at our military power, we have to understand that it is complemented by diplomatic, information, economic, and other kinds of power that can be brought to bear in support of our national goals. So the national security strategy, as mandated by Goldwater-Nichols, is intended to do a variety of things, and it has some ways to try and show major objectives and the kinds of power we will use to get them. And it shows agencies within the government broad outline view of what it is that they need to be doing to formulate their budgets and their overall activities to try and achieve national security goals. And the report is used routinely as we go forward from the executive branch to the legislative branch to try and justify various requests for funding for different kinds of programs. Can also, because it's not a classified document, inform the public, both here and overseas, as to what it is the United States government intends to do. As you read the document, what I'd like you to do is try and decide for yourself whether you think it does all of these things. And one of the questions that I want you to think about as you read this is the national security strategy a good reflection of what it is the United States is attempting to accomplish, or is it simply political pablum? This leads us to the question within the national security strategy of what is it that the United States thinks that it would fight for. It's not always clear, but I would argue that these intensity of interests help us understand that. It's clear that we will fight for our vital interests, and it's equally clear that we will not fight for peripheral interests, which are not really going to affect core national interests. It's unclear at different times and places whether we fight and are willing to die for important issues. And at different times and at different places, the answer has been different for all of those. We also need to understand what the goals are, and we have what are enduring national interests. And I think it's important to recognize that the United States and really all countries have one enduring national interest, and that is pretty much the survival of the state. If you cannot ensure the survival of the state, ensure the survival of the people, then you really don't have a country. And this becomes a problem in sort of ungoverned areas of the world where various kinds of criminal organizations, terrorist organizations, or whatnot threaten the actual existence of the state and the people. So what we're trying to do with the national security strategy is to make sure that we have a stable and secure environment in which to live, and that we are promoting the prosperity of people who live within our nation state. Other things that national decision makers can decide are important are listed here, and all of these are important and interesting, and many of them will in fact directly affect whether or not we can ensure the security of our state, but none of them are a direct link to enduring national interests. So we look at strategy and the ways in which we achieve it, and I alluded to this last week when we talked about some of the ideas as to how strategy would work. This little circle diagram, this cartoon, has been used at the War College for as long as I've been associated with it. It's a really simple way to understand that what strategy tries to do is link our ends with the means we have, and the means we have to achieving the ends with the ways we can actually accomplish them. And what we have is national interests as part of our ends. The means are the tools we have, the forces we have at our hand, and then we use those forces in different kinds of ways under different kinds of concepts to achieve the goals. There are constraints, to be sure, on what our strategy might be. International political environment, the economic status of the world, demographics, and the security environment also constrains it. It depends on how heightened risks are across time and space. All of these risks, the constraints in the security environment, pose risks to our strategy which need to be mitigated. I think it's fair to say that the major strategy documents of the United States at this point are in decent alignment. If you take a look, and you will as we read these, at the national security strategy, the defense strategy, and the military strategy, it seems to me that by and large they are somewhat in alignment with one another. This may be that they have sort of slowly morphed into alignment over a long period of time, as they don't change very much from one document to the next. There is a desire within the Secretary of Defense's office and within the Chairman's office to try and make sure that we are in decent alignment with the national security strategy as promulgated by the presidents. When you look at any of these strategies, it's important to understand how important any of the documents might be. And as you read each of them, I'd like you to have these questions in mind. It seems to me that it really is important for any strategy to inform the next level below as to what it needs to do. And from our perspective, it's important to understand what changes. What do we change from one strategy to the next? President Bush, shortly after 9/11, had some substantial changes to the national security strategy that was different from what existed during the Clinton, Bush, and Reagan years, and led to the idea that the United States will go it alone if it has to, and people thought that was a huge difference. And it's clear that in the current national security strategy, the idea of an America first changes at least the tone in which we look at our national security strategy. So read the national security strategy as you look at this, and try and understand what it is that the president is trying to say in this document. And what he said, I think the goal is to say, look, if the United States isn't strong in and of itself, it can't really serve any role around the world to those who would like to partner with the United States in pursuit of our shared interests and goals. The idea is a very realistic goal. That is, it comes out of the realist school of thought in political science, where what we worry about are the ends, not necessarily ideology, and that what we need to have is a respect for the United States based on strength. The idea of the national security strategy, I think, has 4 major goals. I'm just going to quickly flip through each of those goals. In each of these slides, the means and the ways in which we will accomplish the goals of the national security strategy are highlighted in the red and blue boxes. And you can see that the end is highlighted in the yellow box. So the first one is to protect the American people, and you can see that it really depends on all elements of DIME, and that the ways in which we will do that are to make sure that we can defend against weapons of mass destruction, that we will secure our borders, and that we will make sure that we don't allow people safe haven in any place. When we look at prosperity, the major idea is that we will focus more on diplomatic areas than on military areas, and we worry a lot about economic areas. And you can see that the ways change rather dramatically to make sure that we are getting what we consider to be fair treatment in the international economic system. When we look at preserving peace through strength, this is really an idea that has been around U.S. political science and U.S. realist political thought for a long time, and that is that the United States will always be able to overwhelm any possible opponent. And the national security strategy is trying to look at different ways to improve the way we go about acquiring our weapon systems and military capabilities, and that it's going to look in a lot of ways at modernizing the military force that we have. And finally, we're going to advance American interest, and we use all elements of national power to do that, and we really worry in this instance about trying to encouraging partners to work with us in more effective kinds of ways. So the question that then the Secretary of Defense and indeed all of the cabinet members are asked when they look at this is, so what do you need? It's not an easy question to answer, and it's one which I think we need to think about as we go through this program and through the rest of our military careers.